Well, hi there and welcome to the Bible Talks for Semester 2. It's great to have you joining us here today. My name's Jeffrey Lynn. First of all, just let me explain the background here. Obviously, the Bible Talks are delivered on campus normally, but I gave the talk 3 times this week and each of the 3 video recordings failed. So here's a 4th attempt and it's been done at Holy Trinity. So very great thanks to the tech crew here who will make sure that they make up for my technical incompetence. Anyway, with that out of the way, welcome to the Bible Talks for Semester 2. We're doing a short series on the book of Psalms in the lead into Jesus Week. If you look at the front cover of your handout, you'll see there 3 Psalms, Psalms 13, 14 and 15. I thought I'd briefly tell you why we're doing this. The main reason why we're looking at these Psalms is because, in my view, the best preparation and motivation for Jesus Week is not to tell you about the great initiatives that the team has come up with. They are wonderful and outstanding, and they're terrific opportunities for every member to get involved. But in the end, the best motivation for getting on board with campus evangelism is to be reminded of what our God is like and why He is worthy of us declaring His name and His praises on campus. So this is really a short series on the character of God in the Psalms. And the reason I picked the Psalms is because, for many of us, the Psalms are wonderfully evocative and powerfully moving and stirring, and yet at the same time they're a bit bewildering to us. They're ancient Jewish songs from hundreds of years before Christ, so how do they connect with us today? And I hope to try and help us explore that a little as we go along. If you look at your handout, you'll see that Psalm 13, today's passage, the title is "The God Who Won't Forget You." A God who won't forget you. And I want to start with the question at the top of the handout there. Which is the bigger challenge to your faith? The questions in your head or attacks from unbelievers? Which is the bigger challenge to your faith? The questions in your head or attacks from unbelievers? How might you answer this question? Why would you respond that way? Well, this short but incredibly profound psalm tries to grapple with those very issues. So if you look at the handout then, point 1, what Psalm 13 tells us about God, what God is like. Point 2, how Psalm 13 points us to Jesus who is the fullest revelation of God. And then point 3, what Psalm 13 asks of us today. And just so you know, we'll pause at a couple of points in this talk for you to be able to discuss with the people around you how this applies in our life. Well, point 1 then, what Psalm 13 says about God. As you heard, as it was read, Psalm 13 has a very simple structure. It's in 2 parts. There's the problem in verses 1 through 4, and there's the solution in verses 5 and 6. You'll also notice at the top there that there's a heading for the director of music, a Psalm of David. It's a heading that reminds us that Psalms were songs that were meant to be sung. Now, this song starts with David grabbing our attention with a repeated, powerful lament. You heard it in the reading. How long? 4 times. How long? How long? Let me read it again. Verses 1 and 2. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Now, we don't know the specifics of David's situation, but simply put, he was in serious trouble. He's in serious trouble in at least 3 different ways. Firstly, he was in trouble with God. Verse 1, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? This is a very personal situation for David. It's especially so when you realise that word Lord, in verse 1, the 3rd word Lord, it's in capitals. And the capitals indicates that Lord doesn't mean just a master. Rather, the word Lord there is what we translate as Jehovah or Yahweh. It is the personal name for God that the Israelites had. And so clearly David has trouble with God. And secondly, he has trouble in himself. Pick it up in verse 2. How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? See, God hiding his face from David, God's silence, well, it has put David in a dark place of inner turmoil. Now, I don't want to trivialise things, but let me give you an example or a parallel. Let me ask you, what goes through your mind when you text someone and they don't reply? What are the thoughts that start to spring to the forefront as they don't reply and minutes stretch into hours, into days, into weeks? For David, it's God who has been silent. So David has trouble with God, trouble in himself, but thirdly, he has trouble from others. And in many ways, this is the presenting problem. Verse 2, third line, how long will my enemy triumph over me? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Now, we don't know the specifics of the situation that David's in, but clearly it's some kind of life and death situation. Listen to verses 3 and 4, because they expand verse 2. Verse 3, look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I've overcome him. And my foes will rejoice when I fall. David is in trouble with God. He's in trouble in himself. He's in trouble from others. Is it any surprise that David's circumstances have caused him to question not just himself, but even to question God's character, to question what God is like? Well, let me acknowledge at this point that you might be frustrated by not knowing the specifics of David's situation. And wouldn't it be so much better if we knew what situation he was in? Then we could relate to it better. Well, I understand that. But actually, I think it's okay that we don't know. Because it means, I think, that we're free to imagine similar scenarios when we might say what David says. So to return to my opening question, let me ask you, which is the bigger challenge to your faith? The attacks from unbelievers or the questions in your head? Maybe it's the attacks from unbelievers. It's possible that that could be physical. That actually is the experience of most Christians worldwide over time, of direct physical persecution. But even if it's not, as is our case here in Adelaide, even if it's not direct physical attack, perhaps what bothers you most is the ridicule or scorn heaped on you by unbelievers, particularly during this season. Where is this God you claim loves the world so much? Why has he allowed coronavirus? Maybe it's the attack from unbelievers. Maybe it's questions in our head. One question I think that many of us struggle with was the fact that, in comparison, the lives of unbelievers seem so easy, so uncomplicated at times. I mean, they're not doing what we're doing. As Christians, we're always praying for opportunities to share our faith, always needing courage to take those opportunities when they come. I mean, who really wants to preach sin and forgiveness constantly, the things you must do before you can get to God's love? Surely you've been tempted to keep silent at times, to not rock the boat. It would be so much easier. I know that I have. Well, if verses 1 through 4 outline the severity of the problem, thankfully verses 5 and 6 describe the wonder of David's solution. The wonder of David's solution. You see, the turning point in Psalm 13 comes with the little word but in verse 5. Now, I want to tell you, I am no songwriter. But I imagine that if I was putting this song to music, that in verses 1 through 4, it will be a haunting lament in a minor key as David chronicles his tale of woe. Before in verse 5, you'd have a key change to a major key, to a stirring, upbeat power anthem, building to a rising crescendo. I mean, just listen to it. Verse 5. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Two crucial elements to David's response in verses 5 and 6. Firstly, David never takes matters into his own hands. Did you notice that? David never takes matters into his own hands. He never actually does anything except appeal to God to intervene. I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise. In other words, David's solution is not really David's solution. It's the Lord's. David cannot solve his dilemma. Rather, he knows he needs God's deliverance because he cannot manufacture his own. Second crucial element to David's response. Even though David confidently calls on God to not forget him, to not hide his face, to answer him, to give light to his eyes, David finishes his song without ever telling us if God has actually intervened. Do you notice that in verses 5 and 6? There is no promise of when God will act, just a confidence that he will. No confidence of when God will act. No promise of when God will act, just a confidence that he will. Again, to give a parallel, I think it's kind of like lockdown. It's kind of like lockdown. All of us know that eventually it's going to end. All of us know that eventually we won't have to keep going with all this social distancing stuff. But of course, we don't know when that will be. And that's a large part of our turmoil. If we knew when it would come to an end, we could plan for it. Instead, Psalm 13 simply concludes with David's resolution that he will trust in God's unfailing love, and so his heart rejoices, and he will sing the Lord's praise. I love the progression in just 2 verses there. It's printed on your handout. Trust, rejoice, sing. Trust, rejoice, sing. And in fact, remembering what I said before about the Psalms were songs meant to be sung, I take it that in penning the words to Psalm 13, that's exactly what David is doing. He is singing the Lord's praise. Well, one big question before we pause for a moment to think about application and to talk amongst each other, with each other. Big question is why? Why is David content to trust in God's unfailing love? Why is he content to trust in God's timing and not try to devise his own solution? Well, look with me, if you will, one last time at Psalm 13, and now at the last line of Psalm 13 in verse 6. Pick it up in verse 5. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise. Why? For he has been good to me. For he has been good to me. David is saying that what God has done before gives him confidence about what God will do again. What God has done before gives him confidence about what God will do again. I printed there on your handout, one of the basic tenets of modern psychology is the best indicator of future performance is past behaviour. The best indicator of future performance is past behaviour. I keep repeating this, and you're probably sick of me saying it, but I keep repeating it because it's so easy to forget. You see, we value living in the moment, yet it's so easy to get overwhelmed and flooded in the moment. Which is why Psalm 13 reminds us the only sure way to plan for the future is to remember the past. Perhaps an illustration will help for those of us who wear glasses. You'll know that eventually there comes a day, if you wear glasses, where most people end up wearing multifocals. You know, those things that enable you to see both far and near simultaneously? What Psalm 13 is saying is that we need almost divergent lenses. The ability to see both back to what God has done and therefore forward to what we know He will do. And right here, right now then, Psalm 13 is saying that David has a choice to make. A choice to make now as he waits for God's intervention in the future. And that choice is based on what God has done for him in the past. He can choose to sing God's praise now, no matter how he's feeling, no matter what others are saying. Now, please don't mishear me. This is not to deny the reality of hardship. David doesn't have his head stuck in the sand. He knows that living by faith is hard at times. Hence the lament, how long, how long, how long, Lord? But Psalm 13 is saying that right here, right now, we have a choice to make. And in just 6 verses, we see David move from dwelling on our circumstances to praising God's character. He moves from desperate petition to heartfelt praise, confident that our God will not forget us. Well, we're going to pause at this point for a moment. So what I'll get you to do in a sec is just hit the pause on your screen and look at the discussion question that I've printed there on your handout. Just with those around you, on your own if you're watching it on your own, so that this is actually the Word of God to you, not just out there. The first discussion question only. When do you tend to dwell on your circumstances and why? When do you tend to dwell on your circumstances and why? Just spend a couple of moments reflecting on that and we'll start again. Okay, well, welcome back. So far, if you look at the handout, we've actually covered most of the talk. This is the last section that we'll come to, really, the last third or so. We've already looked at what Psalm 13 tells us what God is like. Now I want us to think for a moment about how Psalm 13 points us towards Jesus, because as Christians we believe that Jesus is the fullest revelation of what God is like. So how does Psalm 13 point us to Jesus? Well, in many, many ways. As I read Psalm 13, I think of Jesus being attacked by his enemies, being attacked by Satan in the desert. Where is your God now? Or I think of Jesus being full of sorrow in his heart at Lazarus' tomb or in the Garden of Gethsemane. But above all, as I read Psalm 13, I think of Jesus' final words before his death. They're printed there on your handout. Both, my God, why have you forsaken me? And, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. How reassuring. Jesus knows what you and I are enduring. He has been there himself. And he is trusted in our Father's unfailing love. How wonderful. The Father did not abandon his Son. He raised him to life. And that means he will never leave us either. What he has begun in the Lord Jesus, he will bring to completion. Well, what Psalm 13 says about God, how Psalm 13 points us to Jesus. Finally then, what Psalm 13 asks of us today. One last time, Psalm 13 is a song. That means it's meant to be sung. And I think actually that's one of the ways in which it can shape us in this week ahead. It's kind of like when you leave church humming a tune of a great song that you have sung. I mean, isn't that one of the griefs that we have of not being able to meet together at the moment? Psalm 13 is a song that's meant to be sung. Now, don't worry. You might be thinking, why does Jeff keep repeating that phrase? Maybe he's going to sing for us. Fear not. I certainly wouldn't subject you to that if I were there in person, and I'm definitely not going to do it on an internet video. That would make it memorable for all the wrong reasons. But I do have a practical suggestion that will help us to have the words of Psalm 13 ringing in our ears as we go into the week, and I'll come back to that at the end. What makes Psalm 13 so memorable, I think, is the fact that it is, to use a bit of a musical phrase, it's a lovely blended three-part harmony. It's a lovely blended three-part harmony. So there's three different voices or tunes in those 6 short verses. In verses 1 and 2, there's the honest expression of David's fears. In verses 3 and 4, there's the pain and the hurt caused by his enemies' attacks. In verses 5 and 6, there is the praiseworthy character of our God. 3 separate voices, all joined together. Because what Psalm 13 is saying, I hope you realise this, Psalm 13 is saying we need all 3 tunes to give a full picture of life. We need more than just unison. A single voice is lovely, a solo is spectacular, but a trio or an ensemble, that is even more memorable. Psalm 13 is telling us that the Lord is in every moment of life, both despair and delight. Which means that no matter what season you are in today, it'll be okay if the God who does not forget us is with us as well. And yet I want to ask you, which of those 3 tunes do you hear most clearly? Which is the one that will stick in your mind in this week as you go from here? Now I want to acknowledge actually that fourfold how long, that is pretty memorable. But actually, it's the conclusion in verses 5 and 6 that should be ringing in our ears. Because it's verses 5 and 6 that stop us from morbidly dwelling on our circumstances and instead moves us to thankfully praising God's character. When you and I, here in Adelaide, we have so many reasons to sing the Lord's praise, for He has been very good to us. Even in this season of coronavirus, it's true that some have suffered horribly here in our country, in our state, but on a global scale, we have been spared. We are so fortunate indeed. One last time. Psalm 13 is not naive. It's not a simplistic, reductionistic message. It's not saying everything is awesome all the time. Rather, it's saying everything will be all right because God has been good to us. And though we don't know exactly when He'll intervene next, we can sing His praise because our good God will never forget us. It is okay to cry out to God, "How long, Lord?" It is okay to cry that, provided you're doing so in faith and you haven't yet given up. One last illustration or parallel. It's like the question that every single child asks on every long car trip that has ever been taken. You know the question, right? Are we there yet? How long until we get there? The child is asking not because they doubt the destination. They know they'll get there. They just want the wait to be over. If you're watching this talk today and you're not a believer, can I thank you for sticking with it for this long? Thanks for accepting the invitation of an ESer to come to the Bible talks and to be part of this thing. Can I say to you that I hope what you've seen today in Psalm 13 is a genuine, authentic, real hope? That's what Christians have. And can I invite you to ask your friend who's brought you, ask them to share with you why they have that hope, because I promise you, they desperately want you to know. On the other hand, if you're watching this talk as a believer, as a member of ES, well, remembering David's progression, trust, rejoice, sing, trust, rejoice, sing, can I encourage you, as Jesus Week approaches, let's sing this song. I don't mean literally, I mean metaphorically. Let's tell of the hope that we have, because we have a better tune than the lament that our world has. Well, to finish, I kept saying that this is a great psalm to have ringing in your ears as you go from here, and I said we're not going to sing it, but here's my suggestion as we conclude. My suggestion is that every day for the next week, when you wake up in the morning, before you reach for your phone, can I encourage you to say verses 5 and 6 of Psalm 13? I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praises, for he has been good to me. Can I encourage you to say that before you get out of bed? Because it seems to me that if you begin your day with that intention, with that desire, you'll have a better chance of living it that way. Why don't you try it for a week, see how you go. In fact, to finish, what I'm going to get us to do is say it together, because that will start the process for us. So, wherever you are, grab your handout, join me in saying together verses 5 and 6. I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. One more time. I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Well, as we finish, if you go back to the left-hand side of your handout, you'll see the second for discussion question. Once again, with the people around you, or if not, on your own for a couple of minutes, can I ask you there to look at that second question? What would help you make the choice to trust, rejoice, and sing? What would help you make the choice to trust, rejoice, and sing? Talk about that for a few minutes, and then hopefully we'll see you next week.